Welcome to Relative, our family mess. Here, I bring you the raw, unspoken stories of older men betrayed by the very families they spent a lifetime protecting, and the dark secrets hidden within the modern home. Now, here is today's story.
When my own son decided I was too filthy to sit at his anniversary table, his wife led me across the yard and locked me inside a storage shed. She looked me in the eye and said my place was there, among the grease and the rust and the things nobody wanted anymore. 3 weeks later, the two of them knelt outside my iron gate, sobbing in the freezing rain, begging me for the very thing they had tried to steal. I looked at them, and I felt nothing at all. Before I go on, tell me in the comments where you are listening from tonight, and if you have ever been treated as worthless by the very people you gave everything to. Hit that like button and subscribe, because this story is for you. My name is Samson Turner. I am 66 years old, and for 40 of those years, I have fixed engines with these two hands. My fingers are stained so deep with oil that no soap on earth can scrub them clean. The knuckles are swollen from 1,000 cold mornings under 1,000 stalled trucks. People look at hands like mine and decide they know the whole story of a man. They are almost always wrong. That evening, I had put on my only good shirt, a pressed blue button-down that still smelled faintly of the cedar drawer where I kept it. I had shaved twice, slow and careful, until the old razor left my jaw smooth. I had even bought a tin of mints at the gas station on the way over, because I didn't want to embarrass my son on his big night. A foolish thing, looking back, as if a mint could change what they had already decided about me. In my arms, I carried a wooden box I had built myself. Inside it sat a clock, a real one, with brass gears I had machined by hand over the course of 2 months. 25 years of marriage deserved something that would still be ticking long after the cheap things broke and were thrown away. I had sanded that box until it was smooth as river stone, and I had rubbed the oil into the grain until it glowed like honey in lamplight. The house rose up at the end of a long circular driveway, glowing gold from every window. Luxury cars lined the curb like sleeping animals, polished and silent. I could hear a string quartet playing somewhere inside, and the bright clinking of crystal, and the easy laughter of people who had never once lain awake over an unpaid bill. I parked my old pickup down the street, out of sight, the way you hide something you are ashamed of. Then I told myself I was being ridiculous, and I walked up to the door anyway. I climbed the wide stone steps and rang the bell. A young man in a black vest opened the door, looked down at my boots, and asked if I was the help. I told him I was Brennan's father. Something flickered across his face, something close to pity, and he asked me to wait right there on the step. Brennan came to the door a moment later. My son. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my truck, and a watch on his wrist that caught the chandelier light and threw it back at me. He did not smile. He stepped outside and pulled the door half shut behind him, the way a man does when he is hiding something he does not want seen. He looked at the wooden box in my arms, then at my clean shirt, and his mouth tightened into a thin line. He said he had not actually expected me to come. He said tonight was important, that there were people inside who could change his entire future. Serious people, the kind who decided whether a man like him rose or fell. He said all this without once meeting my eyes. Then Veronica appeared beside him, my daughter-in-law. She wore a long silver dress and a smile that never reached her eyes. She studied me slowly, from my boots to my collar, and I watched her decide, in real time, that I was a problem to be quietly managed before anyone important noticed. She told me she did not want to make a scene in front of the guests. She said there was a quiet place where I could wait, somewhere comfortable, somewhere out of the way. Her voice was honey and ice all at once. She placed her cool fingers on my elbow and steered me down off the steps, around the side of the great glowing house, across the manicured lawn, toward a small outbuilding at the very back of the property. I did not understand yet. I told myself she was taking me to a side entrance, a guest room, anything but what it was. The gravel crunched under my boots. The music faded behind us into the dark. Ahead of me stood the squat shape of a storage shed, its single window black, a heavy iron bolt drawn back across its door. She stopped in front of it and pushed the door open. The smell of motor oil and old paint drifted out into the cold night air. She gestured inside with one manicured hand, still smiling, and waited for me to step through. I stepped inside because I still believed there had been some mistake. A man does not easily accept that his own blood means to cage him. The shed was small and cold, the concrete floor stained dark with decades of spilled oil. Old paint cans lined one wall. A broken lawnmower sat hunched in the corner like a sleeping dog. A single bare bulb hung from the rafters, unlit. I turned to ask Veronica where the light switch was. That was when she swung the door shut. The iron bolt slid home with a sound I will never forget, a flat metallic clack that echoed once and then died. For a moment, I simply stood there, the wooden box still in my arms, listening to my own breathing in the dark. Then her voice came through the door, calm and almost gentle, the way you might speak to a child you have grown tired of. She told me to stay quiet and stay put. She said the guests inside were important people, and that the sight of a grease-stained old man muttering about engines would ruin everything they had worked for. She said I smelled of the garage, and that the smell did not belong in her home. And then she said the words. She said my place was here, among the grease and the rust and the things nobody wanted anymore. She said it without anger, which was somehow worse than if she had screamed it. Anger fades. Contempt that calm has been practiced for a long time. I heard her heels click away across the gravel. I heard the distant door of the house open, and the music swell out into the night. And then the door close again, sealing all that warmth and light away from me. I stood in the dark of the shed, and I did not move. I want you to understand something. I did not pound on the door. I did not shout my son's name into the night until my voice broke. There was a time, years ago, when I might have, when I was younger and my heart was a louder thing. But a man learns, eventually. That noise is what the weak make when they have nothing else. And I was not weak. I had simply allowed everyone in my life to believe that I was. So I set the wooden box down gently on a workbench I could barely see. I found an overturned crate, and I sat. The cold from the concrete crept up through my boots. Through the thin wall, I could hear the party going on without me, the laughter rising and falling, a woman's bright voice telling a story, the clink of forks on china. My son was in there somewhere, raising a glass, pretending the man who taught him to walk did not exist. I thought about the clock I had built. 2 months of evenings, the brass gears cut by hand, each tooth filed until it meshed without a whisper. I had wanted it to outlast me. I had wanted Brennan to wind it someday, and remembered that his father had made something that kept perfect time. Now it sat in a box in a freezing shed, and the man who made it was locked in beside it, like a tool put away for the night. But here is the strange part. As I sat there in the dark, I felt the anger drain out of me entirely, and something colder and steadier took its place. Clarity. The kind of clarity I usually only felt with a problem engine, when the noise of a thing finally tells you exactly what is broken inside it, because they didn't know. That was the truth I turned over in my hands like a cold piece of steel. Brennan thought I was a broke old mechanic scraping by on a pension. Veronica thought she had locked away a worthless man. Neither of them had any idea what I actually was, or what I actually held, or how easily I could close my hand and end everything they had built on lies. I had kept that secret for 12 years. I had kept it out of love, to make my son into something more than a man waiting on his father to die. I had been wrong. The love had grown nothing in him but rot. I do not know how long I sat there. Long enough for the cold to settle into my bones. Long enough for the laughter to thin and the cars to begin pulling away. Headlights sweeping once across the shed's dark window. At some point I heard footsteps on the gravel, and the bolt scraped back, and the door swung open on an empty yard. No one was there. They had simply remembered, near the end, that they had left something locked outside. I stood, picked up my box, and walked past the dying lights of the house to my truck without a word. They mistook my silence for surrender. They had no idea it was the sound of a man deciding. I did not sleep that night. I drove the long way home, past the dark shapes of shuttered factories and the cold glow of all-night gas stations, and I let the road do my thinking for me. By the time the sky began to gray at the edges, I was pulling into the gravel lot in front of my garage. It is not much to look at. A low cinder block building with a corrugated roof, a faded sign that simply reads, Turner Auto, and 2 bay doors that have not been painted in a decade. But I built it. Every wall, every shelf, every length of pipe overhead. I poured the foundation myself the summer Brennan turned 6, mixing concrete by hand while he played in the dirt with a toy wrench I had cut down to fit his fist. I let myself in through the side door and stood for a while in the quiet. The smell of the place settled over me like an old coat. Motor oil, cold steel, the faint sweetness of the hand soap by the sink. This was the smell Veronica had said did not belong in her home. To me, it smelled like 40 years of honest work. It smelled like every dollar that had paid for Brennan's braces, his bicycle, his first car, the college tuition I had covered without ever once letting him see me worry about it. I turned on a single light over the workbench and set the wooden box down beside the vise. The clock inside had kept ticking the whole time, faithful in the dark. I almost laughed at that. 25 years of marriage, and the only thing in that house keeping honest time was a clock locked in a shed. I thought about Brennan as a boy. He had not always been the man in the charcoal suit. There was a year, maybe 2, when he used to ride out here after school and hand me tools and ask 100 questions about how things worked. I taught him to hold a wrench, to listen to an engine the way you listen to a person, to know the difference between a sound that means tired and a sound that means dying. Then somewhere along the way he decided the garage was something to be ashamed of. He met Veronica in college, and her world had a shine to it that mine never could. By the time he married her, he had stopped telling people what his father did for a living. I heard once, secondhand, that he told a client I was retired. Retired? As if the lights in here did not still burn 6 days a week. I did not hate him for it. A father carries a particular kind of patience, the kind that keeps making excuses long after the excuses run out. He's busy. He's proud. He will come around. I told myself those things for years. but sitting in that shed had burned something away. I was done telling myself stories. I thought, too, about the strange visit Brennan had paid me 8 months back. He had come by the garage on a weekday, which he never did. All warmth and old memories, asking after my health, asking whether I kept my important papers safe. He had even helped me clear out an old filing cabinet, laughing about how I still kept everything on paper. He had taken a stack of canceled checks and a few old birthday cards to scan for me, he said, so I would have copies. I had thought it was kindness. I had been glad of it, glad he wanted to do something for the old man. I did not think about it again. I thought about it now. I thought about it a long while, and the cold clarity from the shed came creeping back. I walked to the rear of the garage, to the small office where I keep the books. Behind a steel shelf stacked with manuals, there is a section of wall that does not look like anything. I pulled the shelf aside on its hidden track. Behind it sat a heavy floor safe, bolted into the concrete I had poured myself, the dial worn smooth from 40 years of my own fingers. Nobody alive knew it was there. Not Brennan. Not Veronica. Not even Dennis Sanders. The only man I fully trusted. Knew exactly where I kept the originals. I knelt down on the cold floor, my knees protesting, and I rested my stained fingers on the dial. The metal was cool and familiar. Whatever I opened this morning, there would be no closing it again. I took a slow breath, and I began to turn the dial. The dial turned under my fingers, the numbers coming back to me without thought. The way your hands remember a song you have not played in years. 21 to the left, 8 to the right, 33 back to the left. The last tumbler dropped with a soft, heavy click, and I pulled the door open on its thick hinges. Inside was not money. People always imagine money. Stacks of it bound in paper bands, the way it looks in films. What sat inside that safe was paper of a different kind. And paper is far more powerful than cash when you understand what to do with it. On top lay a thick folder, its edges soft from years of handling. I lifted it out, set it on my knee, and opened it under the bare bulb. The first page was a United States patent, granted in my name. Samson Turner, 12 years ago. It described a small component, a coupling assembly buried deep inside the cooling systems of heavy engines. You have never heard of it. You will never see it. But it sits inside millions of trucks and machines across this country, doing its quiet work. And every single one of those manufacturers pays a license to use it. For 12 years, those payments had flowed in. Not to me. Not to any account that carried my name. They flowed into a trust I had built with Dennis Sanders, a structure wrapped in so many quiet layers that no one looking at Samson Turner, the grease-stained mechanic, would ever guess what stood behind him. The Turner Legacy Trust. On the ledger in that folder, the number at the bottom had 8 digits in front of the decimal point. I sat there on the cold floor and let myself feel, for just a moment, the full weight of what I had hidden. I had not hidden it out of greed. I want that understood. I hid it because of what I had seen money do to men, and because of what I was already beginning to see in my own son. 12 years ago, Brennan had just married Veronica, and he had come to me with his hand out, talking about an investment, a sure thing. All he needed was a little of the family money to get him started. He did not yet know there was any family money. He only assumed. He had always assumed that one day the old man would die and everything would simply fall into his lap. I made a decision that day, sitting across from Dennis in his office. I told him I would rather let every dollar of it burn than watch my son become a man who waited on a dead father's gift instead of building something with his own 2 hands. So, we built the trust. We made it disappear. To the world, my business stayed small. My truck stayed old. And I stayed exactly what everyone assumed I was. I wanted Brennan to make his own life. I wanted him to learn what I had learned, that a thing you build yourself is the only thing that is ever truly yours. It had not worked. He had built nothing. He had only learned to look more expensive while he sank. I kept turning pages, and near the back I found the deeds, property, land I had acquired quietly over the years, the way a careful man does, buying low and holding through every storm. Among them was a parcel I had almost forgotten owning, a stretch of industrial land on the east side of the city. I read the address twice before it landed. It was the lot where Brennan's real estate company kept its offices. My son ran his glittering business from a building that sat on ground he did not know his own father owned. I closed the folder. The garage was very quiet around me. Somewhere out on the road, a truck downshifted and faded away into the morning. I understood now what I had not let myself understand in the shed. They had not simply insulted me. A man can survive an insult. He can carry it for years and still sit down to supper. But Brennan had taken those canceled checks 8 months ago. And a careful man does not take samples of another man's signature for no reason at all. Something was already in motion. Something I had not yet seen the whole shape of. I needed to know exactly what my son had done. And I knew only one man, alive with the eyes to find it. I pushed myself up off the floor, my knees protesting the cold concrete, the folder heavy in my hand. I crossed to the desk and picked up the phone, and I dialed a number I had known by heart for 20 years. It was time to audit my son's entire life. Dennis Sanders did not ask questions over the phone. He had been my attorney for 20 years, and in 20 years, he had learned that when I called outside of our quarterly reviews, it was never something small. He simply told me to come downtown, and that he would clear his entire morning. I showered and changed back into my work clothes. I did not own a suit, and I had no intention of pretending to be a man I was not. I drove the hour into the city, my old truck rumbling between the glass towers like something that had wandered in from another century, and I parked it in the underground garage of the tallest building downtown, nosed in between a silver coupe and a black sedan that each cost more than my house. The elevator carried me to the 40th floor in silence. When the doors opened, the young woman at the marble reception desk looked up, and for half a second, her eyes caught on my boots and my stained hands. And I saw the old familiar judgment begin to form. Then she recognized my face, and she stood, and her whole posture changed. She did not ask if I had an appointment. She said, "Mr." Sanders was waiting, and she pressed a button and pointed me down the long, quiet hall toward the corner office. Dennis stood when I came in. He is a lean man with silver at his temples, the kind of lawyer who deals only in facts and consequences, who has never raised his voice in his life because he has never once needed to. He looked at the wooden box I was no longer carrying, then at my face, and he gestured to the leather chair across from his desk and asked me what had happened. So I told him. I told him about the anniversary party, the gold light in every window, the string quartet, the cars lined up like sleeping animals. I told him about the wooden clock I had built, the brass gears cut by hand, about my own son pulling the door half shut so the guests inside would not have to see me. I told him about Veronica's cool fingers on my elbow, steering me down off the steps and across the manicured lawn. And I told him about the shed, the smell of oil and old paint, the bolt sliding home, and the words she had said through the door. Your place is here, among the grease and the rust, and the things nobody wanted anymore. I told it all in the same flat voice. I did not perform it. I had no tears left to give it. Dennis listened without moving, his hands folded on the glass, and when I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he took off his glasses and set them down on the desk, and I watched something cold and hard settle into his face. He knew the truth about me. He had helped me build the trust with his own hands, signed the papers, sworn the oaths of secrecy. He understood, better than any man alive, exactly what kind of man they had locked inside that shed. He asked me what I wanted to do. I told him I wanted a full audit. Everything. Every account. Every loan. Every move my son and his wife had made in the last 2 years. I told him about the canceled checks Brennan had taken 8 months ago, the birthday cards he had carried off to scan. And I watched Dennis's jaw tighten when I said it. He understood what that meant as quickly as I had. A man does not collect samples of another man's handwriting out of sentiment. He turned to his keyboard and brought up the master file for the trust, then opened a second window beside it, and a third. He typed in a long authorization code from memory. He explained, while he worked, exactly what he was doing. The trust held my properties under a hard digital lock. Any attempt to touch a title, to place a lien, to pledge any of my land as collateral, would trip an automatic alert straight to his firm's servers. He was pulling the alert log now, going back 2 full years, to see whether anything had ever fired. He fell into the steady rhythm of a man who has done a thing 10,000 times. The only sound in that high, quiet office was the soft, even clicking of his keyboard. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, watching the gray city spread out endless behind him, the river a dull ribbon far below. I asked him whether he expected to find anything. He said probably not. He said the lock had never once been triggered in 10 years, and that he would be genuinely surprised if my son, for all his many faults, had been foolish enough to reach for something he could not possibly understand, was protected. The clicking went on. A spreadsheet bloomed across his screen, columns filling, dates scrolling past faster than I could read them. He scanned it the way I scan an engine, listening for the one part that does not belong, the single wrong note in the machine. Then the clicking stopped. It did not slow. It stopped. All at once, the way a heart stops. Dennis leaned toward the screen, his eyes narrowing to a thin line, and he went very still. He clicked once on a single highlighted row, and a scanned document opened in front of him, and the temperature of the whole room seemed to drop. He did not look up at me right away. When he finally did, his face had lost every trace of the calm I had trusted for 20 years. Dennis turned the laptop around slowly and slid it across the glass desk toward me. He told me the lock had fired. Not 8 months ago, when Brennan took the checks. 3 days ago. 72 hours before I sat in his office. The digital alarm wrapped around one of my properties had tripped and sent its silent signal to his firm, and no one had yet flagged it, because the alert had landed in a queue behind a long holiday weekend. I leaned forward and looked at the screen. The cold clarity I had felt in the shed came back, total and quiet. The way the world goes still in the half-second before you understand what an engine is about to do. The property was the garage, not the industrial lot, not the valuable land beneath my son's offices. The garage, Turner Auto. The cinder block building I had poured with my own hands the summer Brennan turned 6, mixing the concrete while he played in the dirt with a toy wrench. Someone had filed paperwork 3 days ago to pledge it, the whole of it. The land and the building both, as collateral against a loan. Dennis walked me through it line by line, his voice flat and precise, the voice of a man assembling a case in real time. The document was a commercial bridge loan application. The lender was a private institution called Sterling Capital. The amount was $2 million, and the asset securing every dollar of it was my garage, recently appraised. The appraisal attached right there in the file at a number that startled even me. The land it sat on was worth far more than the building ever was. I had always known the east side of the city was rising. I had simply never expected to watch my own son try to pry it out from under me. I asked Dennis who had filed it. He scrolled. And the name at the top of the borrower section was Brennan's Real Estate Company. But a company cannot pledge land it does not own. To use my garage as collateral, someone had to sign as the property's lawful owner. Someone had to stand in front of a notary public and swear, under their own hand, that they held the legal right to give my entire life's work away to a private lender for cash. Then Dennis said something that made me set down the cold coffee his assistant had brought me. He said the terms of the loan made no sense. He had read 10,000 commercial loans in his career, he told me, and he had never once seen a legitimate lender offer terms like these. The interest rate was punishing, far above anything the open market would bear. The whole agreement was built around a single balloon payment, the entire $2 million plus accumulated interest due in full in exactly 6 months. Not amortized, not spread out into something a struggling business might survive. Just a cliff at the end of half a year. No honest bank would ever write a loan a borrower could not possibly repay. He said it the way a doctor reads back a test result that should not be possible, describing a body that has no business still walking around. I did not understand it yet. But Dennis tucked that detail away, and I watched him do it. The same way I tuck away a wrong sound in an engine to come back to once I have the whole machine open on the bench. For the moment, none of it mattered as much as the single question burning in my chest. I asked him to scroll to the very end, to the signature page. I wanted to see, with my own eyes, exactly how my son had managed to sign away the one thing I had built before he was even old enough to hold a wrench. Dennis hesitated. I think he already knew what I was about to feel, and I think, after 20 years, he did not want to be the man who showed it to me, but he dealt in facts, and he knew that I did too. So he turned the laptop back toward himself, clicked twice, and slid it across the glass to me one final time. The screen showed the last page of the loan agreement. Dense legal paragraphs marched down the page. A notary's blue stamp was pressed into the lower corner, and above the stamp, on the line marked Owner, sat a single signature in blue ink. I put on my reading glasses. I leaned close to the glowing screen. I reached out with one stained finger, and, very slowly, I zoomed in on that signature until the strokes of blue ink filled the entire screen, until there was nothing left in all the world but those few inches of handwriting, and my blood went cold. I had expected a fake, some clumsy thing, a rushed scrawl by a man in a hurry, the kind of signature you could point to in a courtroom and say, plainly, that is not my hand. That is not what I saw. What filled the screen was my signature, not an imitation of it. Mine. The hard upstroke on the capital S that I have made the same way since I was 20 years old, learned from my own father, at a kitchen table. The particular loop on the T, the one that flattened slightly because of the way I hold a pen in a fist, built for wrenches. The small, deliberate tail at the end of my last name. A thing I do without thinking. A thing I have never once explained to another living soul. It was all there. Every stroke. Perfect. I sat very still in that leather chair, and I felt something inside me go quiet, in a way it had never gone quiet before. I know handwriting, not as a forger knows it, but as a man knows his own tools. I have signed 40 years of invoices and titles, and the backs of 40 years of checks. And I know what a forgery looks like, even a good one. A forgery hesitates. The pen stops where the eye loses the next stroke. There are tiny pools of ink where the hand waited for the mind to catch up. Faint tremors where a man copied a shape he did not truly understand. A forged signature is a translation, and like all translations, it carries the small stumbles of someone working in a language not his own. This signature had none of that. The ink flowed smooth and certain, one continuous motion, the confident hand of a man writing his own name, which meant only one thing. Whoever made it had not copied my signature. He had learned it. He had practiced it, over and over, for weeks, maybe months, until the shape of my name lived in his own muscles, until he could produce it without thinking, the way I do. And I knew, with a cold and total certainty, exactly whose muscles those were. 8 months ago, my son had sat in my office, all warmth and easy laughter, and carried away a stack of my canceled checks and a handful of old birthday cards. To scan them for me, he said, so I would have copies. I had been grateful. I had been glad. God help me, that he wanted to do a small thing for his old man. He had taken them home to his expensive house. And somewhere in that house, at some desk under some lamp, my son had spread out my signature and studied it the way I once studied an engine diagram. He had traced it. He had drilled it, night after night, while I sat alone in my garage, believing he had simply grown distant. Brennan had been teaching his hand to become my hand. I thought about the table where I taught him to write his own name. He was 5, maybe 6. I held his small fist in mine and guided the pencil, showing him how to make each letter with pride, telling him that a man's name was a thing he signed to say, I stand behind this. This is true. This is mine. I had given him that, and he had taken the very skill I gave him and turned it into the tool he would use to erase me. This was the thing I finally understood. Sitting in Dennis's quiet office. What happened at the party was cruelty. But cruelty is loud and stupid and human. This was something colder. This was patient. This was a man who had decided, months in advance, to take everything I had built and feed it to a lender, and who had practiced my own name in the dark to do it. The shed had not been the crime. The shed was only the contempt that made the crime feel justified to them. The real crime was here, in these few inches of blue ink, perfect and premeditated, and signed with a name he had stolen out of my own hand. Dennis was watching me. He did not offer comfort. He knew comfort was useless in that room, that it would only insult the size of the thing. He simply waited. I took off my reading glasses and folded them and set them on the glass. I looked at my own forged name one more time. And then I looked up at the man who had kept my secrets for 20 years. I told him my son had not made a mistake. A mistake is a thing you stumble into. I told him Brennan had studied for this. He had practiced for this. He had pledged the one piece of ground that held every honest day of my life. And he had used my own hand to do it. This was no mistake. I said, this was a hunt. Dennis did not let me sit in it. He's not a sentimental man, and he understood that the fastest way out of grief is forward, into the facts. He pulled the laptop back and told me that if I truly wanted the whole picture, we should stop guessing and start looking. His firm kept forensic accountants on retainer, and through perfectly legal channels he could trace credit inquiries, outstanding debts, and liens tied to a name. He asked if I wanted him to pull everything on Brennan and Veronica. I told him to leave nothing out. I did not want pieces of my son's life. I wanted all of it, laid bare on the glass like an engine taken down to its bolts. He worked for the better part of an hour. The screen filled and split and filled again, windows stacking on windows. I watched columns of numbers scroll past, red and black, and slowly the shape of a thing began to emerge from them. It was not the shape Brennan showed the world. It was its exact opposite. My son was drowning. The real estate company that he ran like a king, the company with the glittering offices and the leased fleet of cars, was a hollow shell propped up on borrowed money. Dennis pointed at line after line. 2 deals had collapsed in the last year, large ones, the kind a small firm does not survive twice. The payroll was being met out of a high-interest line of credit. The lease on the office, the building that sat on my own forgotten land, was 3 months behind. There was no reserve. There was no cushion. There was only the next payment and the frantic borrowing to make it. Then Dennis opened their personal finances, and somehow, that was worse. The enormous house I had stood in front of just last night, glowing gold from every window, was mortgaged to its rafters, and then mortgaged again. The 2 luxury cars in the circular drive were both leased. Neither of them owned. The watch on Brennan's wrist that had caught the chandelier light, the silver dress, the string quartet, the catered tables of important people. All of it sat on top of 5 credit cards. And Dennis read me the balances on each one. And every single card was at or past its limit. I sat and listened to the accounting of my son's life, and I understood at last what I had been looking at the night before. Veronica had called my garage a place that smelled of failure, but everything in that gold house was failure too. The difference was only that theirs was perfumed. Theirs came wrapped in silk and crystal, and the steady, exhausting work of pretending. They were not wealthy people who looked down on a poor man. They were poorer than I had ever been, drowning in debt I could have paid off with a single signature, and they had locked me in a shed so that the men they were lying to would never catch the scent of it. It explained the desperation. A man does not forge his father's signature for comfort. He does it when the water is at his chin. Brennan needed cash, a great deal of it, fast, to cover the angry creditors and keep the whole fragile illusion standing for one more season. He needed the kind of money no honest bank would ever hand to a man in his condition. So he had reached for the one valuable thing left within his grasp. My garage. My name. But here is where I stopped Dennis, because the math did not close. $2 million. That was the loan. And I sat there and tried to fit $2 million into the hole I was looking at, and it would not go. The collapsed deals, the back rent, the maxed cards, the leases, all of it added up to something serious, something that could ruin a man. But it did not add up to $2 million. It added up to a fraction of that. A man bailing water out of a sinking boat does not ask for 10 times more buckets than the boat could ever hold. I asked Dennis to total the debts. The real ones, all of them. Every creditor with a claim. He did. The number was large. It was not 2 million. So what? I asked him. Was the rest of it for? Why borrow far more than you owe, on terms that guaranteed you could never pay it back, secured against land that was not even yours to give? Dennis looked at the screen for a long moment. Then he said the words slowly, the way a man does when he has just noticed that 2 wrong things might be the same wrong thing. He said he did not know yet, but he said that loans like this one, with terms like these, were almost never really about the borrower at all. Dennis set that thought aside, the way he sets aside anything he cannot yet prove. And he said there was one more thread he wanted to pull before we drew any conclusions. He had been looking at Brennan. He had not yet looked closely at Veronica. I told him to look. I told him to leave nothing in the dark. It took him less time than I expected. Veronica, it turned out, did not simply spend my son's borrowed money on dresses and dinners. She ran a business of her own, a small design and staging company she used to dress empty houses for sale, and she had built it the same way they built everything else in their lives, on appearances stretched thin over a whole. But what Dennis found in her accounts was a different kind of trouble than her husband's. Brennan was merely drowning. Veronica had been committing a crime, and she had been committing it for a long time. He pulled up a civil filing first, then a second, then a third, all of them lodged in the county court within the last 2 months. I leaned in to read the names on them. They were her own clients, people who had hired her, paid her, trusted her, and then come looking for what they were owed and found nothing there. Dennis explained how it worked, tracing the money across the screen with the tip of his pen. Veronica required a large deposit up front, half the total cost, in cash, before she would begin a single day of work. She told her clients the money was needed immediately to order custom furnishings, imported pieces from overseas, things that took long months to arrive. They paid her without hesitation, because she looked exactly like a woman you could trust with a great deal of money, all silk and soft certainty and that smile that never reached her eyes. But she never placed the orders. Dennis showed me the bank records attached to the lawsuits, and they told the whole ugly story in plain numbers. The deposits came in, and then, within days, the money moved straight into her personal accounts, and out again, into lease payments and credit card balances, and, I had no doubt at all, into the cost of a string quartet and a catered party with caviar on silver trays. The furniture never came because the furniture was never ordered. She had been taking honest people's money for work she had never once intended to do, and using it to keep the gold house glowing for 1 more month. One name appeared on 2 separate filings, a woman named Jade Camacho. She had paid Veronica a deposit of $40,000 to stage a home she was preparing to sell, and after 4 months of delays and soothing excuses and unanswered calls, she had finally hired a lawyer of her own. Her filing used a hard word, not negligence, not breach of contract. Fraud. That was the word that changed everything, and I felt it land in the quiet room, because a civil suit is about money, and money can be made to disappear. You can settle a civil suit. You write a check. You make the angry client whole, and the whole matter goes away as though it never happened at all. But the moment a client like Jade Camacho can prove the money was taken with no intention of ever delivering, that it was diverted the same week into a personal account, the matter stops being civil. It becomes theft. It becomes the kind of thing the county will not let you settle quietly behind closed doors with a check and an apology. It becomes the kind of thing that ends with a woman in a silver dress being walked out of her own home in handcuffs, in front of every neighbor she ever looked down on. I sat back in the leather chair, and at last I understood the whole of it. They were not borrowing $2 million to grow a business. They were not even borrowing it merely to keep the illusion breathing a little longer. They were borrowing it to outrun a prison sentence. Veronica needed to make every defrauded client whole. All of them. And fast. Before the civil suits ripened into criminal charges. She needed to pour money back into the holes she had dug, refund the deposits, silence the lawyers, make the word fraud disappear from a prosecutor's desk before it was ever spoken aloud in a courtroom. That kind of money, that quickly, was not available to people in their condition through any honest door in the country. So Brennan had practiced my signature in the dark, night after night. He had pledged the garage I built with these 2 hands to a lender no decent person would ever touch. To raise the cash his wife needed to stay out of a cell. My son had been willing to make his own father homeless to keep his wife out of prison. I told Dennis what I was thinking, and he nodded slowly, because he had arrived there a full step ahead of me. They were not saving a business, I said quietly. They were running from prison, and they were ready to burn down every honest thing I had ever built in order to do it. Dennis wanted to call the authorities that afternoon. He said we already had enough to bury them both. That one phone call to the right office would freeze the loan and put my son in handcuffs before the money ever moved. I told him no, not yet. A quiet arrest behind closed doors would teach them nothing. They would hide behind lawyers and plea deals and emerge in a few years still believing, in their secret hearts, that they had simply been unlucky. I did not want them to feel unlucky. I wanted them to understand, completely, in front of the very people they had traded me for. But before any of that, I needed one more thing. I needed to look my son in the eye and give him a single, final chance to be a man. I did not expect him to take it, but I needed to see, for myself, that the door was truly closed. So the next morning I drove to his office. It sat in a low-glass building on the east side, on land I now knew I owned, with his company's name etched in frosted letters across the door. Inside it was all white walls and pale wood, and the careful smell of money that does not exist. A young receptionist looked up at my boots and asked, in a tone I had heard 100 times, whether I was a delivery. I told her I was Brennan Dawson's father, and I watched the word father confuse her, as though such a man could not possibly produce a son in a charcoal suit. Brennan came out fast, before she could announce me, steering me by the arm toward an empty conference room the way Veronica had steered me toward the shed. He shut the glass door. He did not ask why I had come. He told me, low and tight, that I could not simply show up at his place of business, looking the way I looked, that he had clients, that he had a reputation he had spent years building and could not have undone by an old man tracking grease across his floors. Then he reached into his jacket, and he took out his wallet, and he held out $200 in crisp bills. He told me to take it. He said it the way you pay a man to go away. He said he knew things had been hard, that the garage probably was not bringing in what it used to, and that this would tide me over. He told me to buy myself something decent and to stop coming around unannounced. I looked at the money in his hand. My son, who had pledged my life's work to a loan shark, who had practiced my name in the dark to do it, was standing in an office on my own land, offering me $200 to disappear. I did not take it. I did not refuse it either. I simply let it hang there between us until he grew uncomfortable and put it back. It was then that I saw the boy, through the glass wall of the conference room, out in the open office. A young man stood at a desk with a stack of papers in his hands. My grandson, Cadence. I had not seen him in nearly 2 years, and he had grown into a tall, quiet thing, with his grandmother's eyes. He was watching us through the glass. He had heard, or guessed, enough. And the look on his face was not the bored contempt of his parents. It was something else entirely. It was shame. Not shame of me. Shame for what he was seeing his father do to me. For one moment our eyes met through the glass. He did not look away. Something passed between us, the way it does between two people who both know they are standing inside the same lie, and only one of them is comfortable there. Then Veronica swept in from a side hallway and saw me, and her face hardened, and she began telling Brennan to walk me out before the 11 o'clock client arrived. Cadence dropped his eyes back to his papers. The moment closed. Brennan took my elbow again. I let him guide me toward the door, past the receptionist, out into the cold, bright morning. He said something on the way. Some last, sharp thing about respect and embarrassment. But I was no longer listening to the words, because as he gripped my arm and walked me out of an office built on my own ground, my free hand slid quietly into the pocket of my work jacket, and my stained thumb found the small switch on the side of the recorder I had carried in with me, and I pressed it down. I did not let him walk me all the way to the truck. On the sidewalk, in the cold, bright morning, I stopped and turned, and I asked my son a question. I kept my voice mild, the voice of a confused old man who did not understand the modern world. I asked him how business was. Truly, I told him the offices looked impressive, that he had clearly done well for himself, and I asked him how a man built something like that from nothing. It was bait, and his pride swallowed it whole. He straightened. The irritation in his face gave way to something worse. The easy contempt of a man explaining the world to someone he believes is beneath it. He told me that real money moved fast when you had vision, that he had built an empire while I was still changing oil in a cinder-block shack. He said he had investors lining up, that he was about to close the biggest deal of his life, that within a week he would have capital flowing in that would make the garage look like the joke it was. I asked him, gently, where that kind of money came from. I said I had read that lenders wanted real assets, real collateral, before they handed a man millions. I asked him what he had put up to guarantee it. For 1 second, something flickered behind his eyes. A full of caution. Then his pride buried it, the way pride always does. He told me not to worry about things I could never understand. He said he had leveraged his own holdings, his own portfolio, his wife's client list, that the lenders had looked at all of it and called him a sure thing. I looked at him a long moment. Then I gave him the door. I asked him, slow and plain, if everything he had built was clean. I asked him whether he had ever, even once, used something that did not belong to him to prop up the life he was living. I told him, the way my own father once told me, that a house built on stolen ground always comes down, and it always comes down on the man standing inside it. It struck a nerve, but it did not strike the nerve of guilt. It struck his pride, which was the only nerve he had left. He stepped close to me, close enough that I could smell last night's wine still on him, and he told me I was pathetic. He said I was jealous of a success I was too small to imagine. He swore, on his life, that every dollar he had was earned by his own hand, that he had never taken a thing from me or from anyone, that he owed me nothing and never would. He looked his own father in the eye and lied with perfect, fluent ease. That was the moment I had come for. There was no good man buried under the suit, no panicked, decent person who had made one terrible mistake. There was only this, a man defending a thing he had stolen, ready to call the robbed man a thief. I nodded once. I told him I understood him perfectly now, and in my pocket, my thumb pressed the switch again, and the small device clicked, and 20 minutes of his arrogance and his denial were saved to a chip no bigger than my thumbnail. Every boast, every lie, his own voice swearing he had never used anything that was not his, recorded the same week he pledged my garage under my forged name. I drove straight back downtown to Dennis. He was waiting. While I had been at the office, he had kept working the loan, and he had finally cracked the thing that had not added up, the question of why a man would borrow $2 million against terms that guaranteed his ruin. He sat me down and turned the screen toward me, and he explained what Sterling Capital actually was. They were not in the business of lending money. They were in the business of taking land. Dennis laid it out the way you lay out a diagnosis. A legitimate lender wants to be paid back, he said. That is how they profit. But a predatory lender like Sterling makes its real money another way entirely. They seek out desperate men with valuable collateral, and they write loans those men cannot possibly repay. On purpose. The punishing interest. The 6-month balloon. None of it was a mistake. It was the design. They were not betting Brennan would pay. They were counting on him to fail. And when he failed, when the balloon payment came due in 6 months and there was no possible way to meet it, Sterling would not sue. They would not chase him through years of court. The loan contained a hard forfeiture clause. They would simply seize the collateral, free and clear. And the collateral was my garage and the rising east side land beneath it. They would carve it into commercial lots and sell it for many times what they had ever lent. The $2 million was never meant to be repaid. It was bait. The land was the prize. I sat and let it settle. Brennan thought he was the clever one, using my name to raise the money he needed. He had no idea he was a fish himself, swimming straight into a net that had been set for exactly his kind of fool. He had betrayed me to save his wife, and in doing so, he had handed my life's work to men who collected the property of desperate men for sport. There were 2 sets of predators now. My son, who had hunted me with my own signature, and the men at Sterling, who were patiently waiting for him to drown so they could take what he had stolen. I told Dennis I had heard enough. I took the recorder from my pocket and set it on his glass desk and told him what I intended to do with it. Then I stood and I picked up my jacket. It was time, I said, to go and meet the men who were waiting to steal my land. Sterling Capital kept its offices on the top 3 floors of a steel tower downtown, the kind of building designed to make a man feel small the moment he walks in. The lobby was dark walnut and charcoal carpet, and the air was kept a few degrees too cool, so that everyone who entered felt a little exposed, a little unwelcome, a little eager to please. I have spent my life in cold places. It did not work on me. A security guard in a tailored suit watched me cross the floor. The receptionist behind the long marble desk looked up, took in my work boots and my stained hands, and asked, with a thin smile, whether I might be looking for the service entrance. I placed both of my hands flat on her clean marble desk. I told her I was not lost. I told her to call the director of commercial lending immediately and to tell him that the collateral on the $2 million bridge loan to my son's company was fraudulent, that the property had been pledged by a man who did not own it, and that every minute his firm waited was a minute it spent exposed to a federal crime. The thin smile fell off her face. She picked up her phone. Less than 2 minutes later, a tall man in a gray suit came hurrying out through a set of double doors. And he did not look like a predator anymore. He looked like a man who had just been told there was smoke coming from somewhere in his building. He introduced himself as Albert Arroyo, regional director. He did not offer me coffee. He ushered me through the doors, past the watching guard, into a private corner office, and he shut the heavy door behind us. He asked me, carefully, who I was and what exactly I meant by fraudulent. I did not answer right away. I reached into my back pocket and took out my worn leather wallet and slid my driver's license across his desk. He picked it up and read the name, Samson Turner, and I watched it land. He knew that name. It was the name on the owner's line of the loan he had just approved. Then I reached into my jacket and took out the thick envelope Dennis had prepared, and I drew from it the original deed to my garage. Not a copy. The original, heavy paper, stamped with the seal of the state, and beneath it the certification of the Turner Legacy Trust, showing that the property had been locked inside that trust for 10 years. I laid it on his desk beside my license. I told him to read the second paragraph, the clause that put a hard lock on the title, the clause that said, in language no court could misread, that this property could not be sold, transferred, or pledged as collateral by any person, that the title was frozen, and that no signature on earth, mine included, carried the authority to give it away. Albert Arroyo leaned over the deed and read it, and the color drained slowly out of his face. He was a man who understood liability the way I understand engines. He understood, in real time, exactly what had happened. His firm had approved $2 million against a piece of property it could never legally touch. The signature on his loan was a forgery. And if that money moved, if it was wired into my son's account, his firm would have handed $2 million into the hands of a felon, secured against nothing. And federal investigators would want to know how a lender of Sterling's reputation had failed to verify a single deed. He did not yet know that I knew what his firm truly was. He did not know I understood the loan had been designed to fail, that the whole punishing structure of it was a trap to seize my land. He thought he was simply the victim of a clever fraud. I let him think it. For now, he began to panic in the quiet, controlled way of a man who has never panicked in public. He reached for the phone on his desk. He said he would call his legal department. Freeze the disbursement immediately. Kill the loan before it could fund. He started to say something about identity theft, about how Sterling itself had been deceived, already rehearsing the story he would tell. I reached across the desk and laid my hand flat over his, holding the phone down against the wood. He looked up at me, startled, as though the old man across from him had suddenly changed shape. I told him he was not going to cancel the loan. Not today. Not quietly. I told him we were going to let it proceed, exactly as my son expected it to. Every step on schedule. I told him the money would be ready to move precisely when Brennan believed it would. Albert Arroyo stared at me as if I had lost my mind. He asked me why on earth I would let a fraudulent loan against my own land go forward, when one phone call could stop it where it stood and protect us both. I kept my hand on the phone. I held his eyes, and I told him that stopping it quietly would protect his firm and teach my son nothing. The boy would simply find another lender, forge another paper, run the same play on someone slower to catch it. I had not come to stop one loan. I had come to end the whole thing, in the open, in front of the only people my son had ever truly cared about impressing. Then I reached into my pocket, and I set a small digital recorder on his desk, and I asked him if he had a few minutes to listen to something. I pressed the play button, and my son's voice filled Albert Arroyo's quiet office. It was strange, hearing it there, in that cold walnut room. Brennan's voice, confident and sharp, swearing he had built his empire with his own 2 hands, bragging about the biggest deal of his life, about capital flowing in within the week, and then, clear as a struck bell, my own question, gentle and plain, asking whether he had ever used something that did not belong to him. And then Brennan's answer, the denial, on his life, every dollar his own. He had never taken a thing from me or anyone. Recorded the same week he forged my name on the deed sitting on Arroyo's desk. I let it play to the end. Then I switched it off and let the silence do its work. Arroyo sat very still. He understood now that I was not a confused old man who had stumbled onto a fraud. I was a man who had walked into his office already holding every card, and who had chosen, deliberately, not to play the easy one. He asked me, quietly, what it was I actually wanted, really. I told him the loan would proceed on paper, exactly as Brennan expected. The approval would stand. My son would be told, in the next day or 2, that the funds had cleared and would be available to draw against by Friday. He would believe he had won. He would believe the garage was pledged. The money was his. His wife's clients would be repaid. The prison door swinging shut would swing open again. He would believe all of it, right up until the moment I chose to take it from him. Then I laid out the rest. On Friday evening, My son and his wife were hosting a gala. Dennis had already confirmed it. A grand event to launch their newest real estate project, to be held in a banquet hall they could not afford, attended by the investors and developers and powerful people they had spent years trying to climb toward, the same people they had locked me in a shed to impress. Brennan intended to stand in that room and announce his great triumph, to celebrate the arrival of Sterling's money in front of every person whose respect he hungered for. I wanted Arroyo to freeze every account, personal and business, tied to my son and his wife at exactly 5 o'clock that Friday afternoon. 1 hour before the gala began, the frozen retainers, the maxed cards, the line of credit, all of it locked down at once, on a federal hold, so that when they walked into that hall, they would already be penniless and not yet know it. And I wanted a certified letter, a formal revocation of the loan, on Sterling's own letterhead, citing fraudulent collateral and a forged signature, naming the crime in plain language. My attorney and I would deliver it ourselves. To their table, in front of their guests. Arroyo listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him doing the arithmetic that men like him always do, weighing his own exposure against his own advantage. He had every reason to agree. If he cooperated, his firm came out clean, the deceived party, the institution that caught the fraud and stopped the money. If he refused, he was a lender who had approved $2 million against a forged deed and let it fund. I had given him the only path that did not end with federal investigators in his own lobby, but I needed more than his cooperation. I needed him to understand that I knew what Sterling was. So before he could answer, I told him I knew the loan had been designed to fail. I told him I understood the punishing interest and the 6-month balloon and the forfeiture clause, that I knew his firm had never expected repayment, that the whole structure was built to seize my land the moment Brennan drowned. I told him I knew the $2 million was bait, and the garage was the prize. I watched that land, too. For just a moment, the careful regret on his face slipped, and I saw underneath it the thing he truly was. Then it smoothed over again. He did not deny it. A man like Arroyo does not waste breath denying a thing to someone who already holds the proof. I told him I was giving him a gift he did not deserve. A way out. He would help me spring this trap, cleanly and completely. And in exchange, I would not turn the full weight of what I knew about Sterling Capital over to the people who would very much like to know it. He would walk away from my land forever, and he would walk away free. That was the trade. Arroyo looked at the deed, and at the recorder, and at my stained hands resting on his desk, and he understood that he was not negotiating. He was accepting terms. He nodded. He said it would be done. 5 o'clock Friday. The accounts frozen. The letter prepared and ready. The disbursement held back at the final second, after my son believed it had cleared. I stood and gathered my deed back into its envelope. I told him I would see him Friday. I walked out through the cold walnut lobby, past the guard, into the gray afternoon. And for the first time since the bolt had slid home on that shed door, I felt the thing settle fully into place. The trap was armed. Friday came slow, and then all at once, the way the worst and the best days always do. I spent the morning in the garage. It seems a strange thing, but I could think of nowhere I would rather have been. I swept the floor. I wiped down the tools and hung each one in its place. I ran a soft cloth over the wooden box that still held the clock I had built. The clock that had kept honest time through the whole long night in the shed. I did not feel triumphant. I want that understood. A man does not feel triumph when he is about to take his own son apart. What I felt was steady, settled. The way you feel when a machine you have labored over for weeks is finally about to turn over and run. At 4 o'clock, I changed. Not into a suit. I put on a clean work shirt, dark green, and my good boots, the ones without the mud. If they were going to see me, they would see exactly what I was. I would not borrow another man's costume to deliver the truth. I drove downtown one last time and met Dennis in the lobby of a hotel 2 blocks from the banquet hall. He was in his charcoal gray suit, calm as ever, a slim leather briefcase in his hand that held the certified letter and the supporting file. Every page of it. The forged deed. The locked title. The loan terms. The transcript of my son's recorded voice. Everything a prosecutor would ever need. Arranged in order. Tabbed and clean. He was not alone. 2 men stood with him, and they were not dressed for a gala. Dark, plain suits. Sensible shoes. The flat, alert stillness of men who spend their lives watching other men. Dennis introduced them quietly. Special Agent Matthew Long, Special Agent Otto Archer, Federal Financial Crimes. We did not shake hands. This was not a social evening. It was an operation, and they treated it as one. Dennis had spent the week doing what Dennis does. He had taken the file to the right office, and the right people had looked at it, and they had agreed that bank fraud, wire fraud, and forgery of a federal lending document were worth an evening of their agent's time. They would not move until I gave the word. But they would be there, at the doors. When I did, at 5 o'clock, my phone buzzed. It was a single line from Arroyo. Done. I knew exactly what it meant. Somewhere across the city, in a server I would never see. A command had just gone out across the banking network. Every account tied to Brennan and Veronica, personal and business both, frozen in the same instant. The credit cards dead. The line of credit revoked. The stolen retainers locked behind a federal hold. The $2 million that my son believed had cleared into his account that very afternoon was a ghost. A number on a screen he would never be able to touch, and he did not know. That was the part I kept turning over. Right then, at 5 o'clock. My son was almost certainly standing in front of a mirror in a rented tuxedo, adjusting his tie, rehearsing the speech he would give to the most important people he had ever gathered in one room. His wife was fastening a necklace, smoothing a gown, certain that by tomorrow morning the clients would be paid and the danger past. They were already ruined. They simply had not been told yet. They were dead men dressing for a party. I stood in that hotel lobby and felt the clock of the thing tighten around them. 1 hour. The gala began at 7. Somewhere in that hour, the catering would be finishing, the wine breathing, the first cars pulling up to the valet. My son would walk into that hall the richest man in the room in his own mind, and the poorest, in fact, and he would not know which until I chose to tell him. Dennis checked his watch and looked at me. He asked, simply, if I was ready. I thought about the bolt sliding home on the shed door. I thought about Veronica's voice, calm and almost gentle, telling me my place was here, among the grease and the rust and the things nobody wanted. I thought about a 5-year-old boy's fist closed around mine, learning to write his own name with pride. I told Dennis I was ready. We walked the 2 blocks together in the failing light, the 4 of us, our footsteps falling into rhythm on the cold pavement. The banquet hall rose ahead of us, every window lit, warm gold light spilling out onto the street, exactly as my son's house had spilled it 3 weeks before. A line of luxury cars curled along the curb, through the great front doors, held open by a man in a uniform. I could hear it. The string music, the bright clinking of crystal, the easy laughter of people who had never once worried over a bill, the same sounds I had heard through the wall of a locked shed. I stopped on the threshold for just a moment, and I let myself listen to them one last time. Then I stepped through the doors, into the light, and I went to find my son. I did not go to him at once. I stepped just inside the doors, into the shadow of a great marble column, and I let myself stand there a moment, unseen, and take the measure of the room. It was a beautiful lie. I will give them that. The banquet hall rose 2 stories under a ceiling hung with chandeliers, and every surface in it had been dressed to say wealth. Towering arrangements of white orchids stood on pedestals along the walls. Long tables draped in white linen held more crystal and silver than a working man sees in a lifetime. Waiters moved through the crowd like quiet ghosts, trays balanced on their fingertips, refilling glasses before they were ever empty. A string quartet played in the corner, the same bright, untroubled music I had heard through the wall of a shed. The air smelled of lilies and roasted meat and money that was not real. 100 people, maybe more, stood in clusters with drinks in their hands. I knew the type without knowing the faces. Developers, investors, the kind of people who decide whether a man rises or falls. Exactly as my son had told me 3 weeks before. These were the people he had locked me away to impress. I looked at them and felt nothing. They were extras in a play that was about to lose its theater. At the center of it all stood Brennan and Veronica. My son wore a black tuxedo, new, cut sharp to his frame, and he wore it the way a man wears armor he believes makes him invincible. He had a glass of dark wine in one hand, and he was holding court, his face flushed with the particular joy of a man who believes he has finally won. Veronica stood beside him in a long emerald gown, a diamond at her throat, catching the chandelier light and throwing it back in little knives. She was radiant. She leaned toward a circle of women and spoke with her hands, painting some picture in the air, and they laughed, and she laughed, and not one line of worry touched her face. I watched my son work the most important man in the room. He stood squared to a tall, silver-haired man in a flawless suit, a man the others orbited without seeming to, and I understood at once that this was the one that mattered. Tatum Hunt. Dennis had named him in the file. 30 years in private equity, a portfolio thick with commercial land, a man known for smelling a bad deal from across a city. Brennan was pitching him. I could not hear the words from where I stood, but I didn't need to. I knew the shape of it, the luxury project, the guaranteed returns, the capital flowing in by Friday, which my son believed had already flowed. He spoke with his whole body, leaning in, gesturing wide, and Tatum Hunt listened with the still, patient face of a man deciding. It was all built on nothing. The money was frozen. The land was not his. The clients were unpaid, and a prosecutor was a phone call away. And there he stood, my son, pouring the last of his stolen confidence into the ear of a man who could destroy him with a word, never knowing that the destruction was already standing in the doorway in a green work shirt. Then I saw the boy. Cadence stood at the edge of the room, near the windows, apart from all of it. He held a glass he was not drinking from. He wore a jacket that did not fit him quite right, the jacket of a young man dressed by his parents for a part he did not want to play. And while every other face in that hall was turned toward the light at the center, toward Brennan and his triumph, Cadence's face was turned away. He was watching the waiters. He was watching the lie. He had the look of a person standing in a house he has just realized is on fire, while everyone around him goes on dancing. For one moment he glanced toward the doors, and I do not think he saw me in the shadow of the column. But I saw him. I saw that he did not belong to this room any more than I did. We were the only two honest things in it. A spoon rang against crystal. The room began to hush. Brennan had stepped up onto the low dais at the front, his glass raised high. That flushed, triumphant smile spread across his face. He waited for the quiet, savoring it, the way a man savors a thing he believes he has earned. He thanked his guests for sharing this momentous night. He spoke of vision, of courage, of the partnership that would change the city. He turned to Tatum Hunt and called this the beginning of something unstoppable. He asked them all to raise their glasses to his guaranteed, glittering future. 100 crystal flutes rose into the chandelier light, and as they did, as the whole room lifted their glasses to toast a fortune that had ceased to exist 1 hour before, I stepped out of the shadow of the column, and behind me, the great doors of the hall swung open without a knock. The doors swung wide, and the warm gold air of the room collided with something colder, coming in from the hall. I walked in first. Behind me came Dennis in his charcoal suit, and behind him, the two agents, Long and Archer, who stepped to either side of the doorway and stopped there, planting themselves like posts, blocking the only way out. They did not announce themselves. They did not need to. There is a particular stillness to men like that, and a crowded room feels it before it understands it. The toast died in the air. 100 raised glasses hung there, half lifted, as heads began to turn toward the doors. The string quartet faltered, one instrument trailing off, then another, until the music simply stopped. The bright, easy laughter thinned into a confused murmur, and then into silence. I walked toward the center of the room. I did not hurry. I let the heavy tread of my boots fall against the polished floor, one slow step after another, the only sound in that vast, hushed hall. Heads turned to follow me. I watched the wealthy faces do the arithmetic. An old man in a green work shirt and scuffed boots walking through their gala as though he owned it, flanked by a lawyer and 2 men who could only be one thing. They did not know what they were looking at. They only knew it was wrong. And that wrongness was contagious, and several of them set their glasses down without finishing the toast. Brennan saw me from the dais. I watched it happen on his face. The flushed triumph froze first, then cracked, then fell away entirely, like cheap plaster off a wall. For 1 second, he simply could not make sense of it. His 2 worlds. The father he had locked in a shed and the future he was toasting, colliding in the same room. His mouth opened. No sound came out. The glass in his raised hand began, very slightly, to shake. Veronica turned next. Her eyes found me and swept down, boots to collar, the old contempt rising by pure habit. And then she saw the men at the door, and the contempt curdled into something else, something I had waited 3 weeks to see on that flawless face. Fear. Real, animal fear. She knew exactly what she had done with her client's money, and she knew, in that instant, that the bill had finally come. Tatum Hunt lowered his glass to the table and looked at me, then at Brennan, waiting, with the cold patience of a man who has watched many ships sink and intends to be standing well clear of this one. I reached the center of the room. Dennis stepped up beside me, and when he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of that hall without his ever raising it. The trained, certain voice of a man who has delivered hard news in hard rooms for 30 years. He named himself, senior managing partner of his firm. Then he turned, just slightly, toward the 2 men at the door, and he named them too. Special Agents Long and Archer, Federal Financial Crimes Division. The word federal moved through that room like a current through water. I saw it travel. I saw the powerful people closest to Brennan begin, instinctively, to lean away from him, to put inches and then feet of polished floor between themselves and the thing that had just been named. Tatum Hunt slid his chair back from the table. Men like these do not survive by standing near a federal investigation. The mere word was a disease, and not one of them wanted it on their hands. And across the room, by the windows, I saw Cadence. The boy had not moved, but something in his face had changed. When the doors opened, he had looked afraid. The way any young man fears the sudden arrival of the law. Now, as he understood, as he watched his father's triumph collapse and his grandfather walk to the center of the room flanked by agents, the fear gave way to something steadier. He set his untouched glass down on the windowsill. He stood up straight. He looked at me, and he did not look away. And in that look was a thing I had not seen in years: recognition, as though he were seeing, for the first time, which of the men in his family had been the honest one all along. I held his eyes for just a moment. Then I turned back to my son. I reached into the inside pocket of my green jacket and drew out the thick envelope Dennis had prepared. Heavy paper sealed with the embossed gold seal of the Turner Legacy Trust. Brennan stared at it. I think some part of him recognized it the way a man recognizes a thing in a nightmare. I did not hand it to him. I did not offer it gently, or take him aside to spare him in front of his guests. He had not spared me. I reached across the white linen table, past the crystal and the orchids, and I dropped the envelope squarely onto his plate, where it landed in the rich, dark sauce of a meal he would never finish. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Tatum Hunt, who had spent 30 years knowing exactly where the danger in a room was, reached across the table, picked the heavy envelope up off my son's plate, and broke the seal. Tatum Hunt read in silence. The whole hall watched him do it. He pulled out the certified letter and the pages behind it, set his reading glasses on his nose, and moved his eyes down the lines with the cold efficiency of a man who has read 10,000 contracts and learned to find the artery in each one. I watched his jaw tighten. I watched him turn a page and another. The forged deed. The locked title. The terms of a loan no honest lender would write. He was reading the death of his own pending fortune in real time, and he did not flinch. Men like Tatum Hunt do not flinch. They simply recalculate. When he finished, he took off his glasses, folded them with great care, and laid the letter flat on the white linen, where everyone near could see it. Then he looked at my son. He did not shout. Men of his weight do not need volume to end a person. He spoke in a low, level voice that carried to every silent corner of that room. He said that in 30 years he had seen bad deals and failed ventures and men who lied about their numbers. But he had never, he said, seen a man stupid enough to forge a federal lending document, pledge property he did not own, and then invite federal agents to his own celebration. He turned to the room. He told them, plainly, that the company they had come tonight to invest in was insolvent, that it ran on stolen money, that the collateral behind its loans was fraudulent, and that any man who lingered in this room another minute risked being named in a federal fraud investigation. The room did not debate it. The presence of the agents, the seal of the letter, the calm authority of Tatum Hunt himself, it was more than enough. The instinct that had made these people wealthy was the same instinct that now moved them all at once toward the doors. Chairs scraped back. Several toppled and clattered against the floor. The women who had been laughing with Veronica an hour before now pulled away from her as though she carried plague, gathering their wraps, refusing to meet her eyes. Veronica reached for one of them, a hand outstretched, some practiced explanation already forming on her lips, a misunderstanding, an administrative error. The woman recoiled from her touch, and I watched the last of Veronica's mask slide off and shatter on the floor. She was not a sophisticated visionary anymore. She was a thief in a borrowed gown, watching the only world she valued empty out around her. Tatum Hunt was the last to go. He buttoned his jacket, looked down at Brennan with an expression of pure contempt, and told him he was finished. Blacklisted from every institution Hunt could reach, and he could reach all of them. He told my son to find a very good criminal lawyer, because he was going to need one. And then he walked out without looking back. Within a minute, the hall was nearly empty of its guests. What remained was wreckage, overturned chairs, spilled wine bleeding dark across white linen, plates of expensive food abandoned mid-meal. The string quartet had fled with their instruments. The chandeliers blazed down on an empty, ruined room, and on the four of us who remained, and on my son and his wife. It was then that the manager of the hall approached, a composed woman named Everly Robinson, holding a slim leather folio. She had been told, perhaps, that the party was ending early. She had a job to do regardless. She stepped around a pool of spilled wine, set the folio on the table beside the certified letter, and announced the bill for the evening, a number with 4 figures in it. Brennan did not even hear her. He was past hearing, but Veronica heard. And in the wreckage of everything, her shattered mind reached for the one problem she thought she could still solve. She straightened. She smoothed her emerald gown with shaking hands. She pulled a heavy platinum card from her bag and held it out to Everly Robinson with a trembling attempt at a smile, ordering her to run it, as though paying this one bill could buy back a single inch of the ground she had lost. Everly Robinson took the card and stepped away. We all waited, and when she returned, she was not alone. And she laid the folio open on the table, and inside it, beside the platinum card, lay a printed slip, declined, account frozen. Veronica stared at it. She dug into her bag and threw down more cards, a fan of them across the linen, demanding the woman try every one. Everly Robinson did not touch them. She said, quietly, that the bank had instructed her to retain all cards bearing the name, and she gathered them up and slid them into her pocket, and Veronica made a small, broken sound. I will not forget. And Brennan, at last, came apart. He slid down out of his chair and onto his knees on the polished floor. There, in the spilled wine and the ruin of his great night, and he buried his face in his hands. And he wept, not quietly, not with any dignity. It was the raw, animal sound of a man watching his entire reality collapse in real time, in the very room where he had stood, minutes before. A king. I did not move toward him. I did not feel the pull to. I had built this carefully, and it had run exactly as I designed it, and I felt no triumph in it, only a cold and finished stillness. I turned away from my weeping son, and across that ruined, gleaming room, by the windows, I found Cadence still standing there, watching it all, watching me. Our eyes met over the wreckage. 2 weeks passed, and the world I had set in motion ran its course without any further help from me. I did not need to push. Once a thing like that begins to fall, it falls under its own weight. Dennis kept me informed, and the news did the rest. The collapse of my son's company was not quiet. The investors Tatum Hunt had warned made certain of that, telling the story in every boardroom and club in the city, until the name Dawson became a thing men said with a curled lip on the Monday after the gala. The landlord changed the locks on the glass offices and taped a notice across the frosted door. By Wednesday, the leasing company sent flatbed trucks to the Gold House and hauled away both luxury cars down the long circular drive while the neighbors watched from behind their curtains. On Friday, the bank filed for foreclosure on the house itself, the great glowing house, citing the federal investigation as a breach of every term they had signed. The frozen accounts stayed frozen. The civil suits from the defrauded clients, with Jade Camacho's name at the front of them, hardened toward criminal charges exactly as Dennis had warned they would. The whole empire, built on my forged name, dissolved in 14 days. I felt nothing watching it go. I want to be honest about that, because I think some men would expect grief, and there was none. What I felt was the quiet a man feels after he has finally pulled a seized engine out of a chassis. Heavy, final, clean. Then, on a gray afternoon with the rain coming down in cold sheets, I heard tires on the gravel outside my gate. I was in the garage, running a cloth over the wooden box, the way I do now when I need my hands busy. I walked to the window and looked out through the rain. A yellow taxi sat idling on the far side of my iron gate, its color absurd against the dark, wet trees. The gate was locked. I keep it locked now. 2 doors opened. Brennan and Veronica stepped out into the downpour, and the taxi immediately reversed, swung around, and sped away down the rural road, leaving them stranded in the rain. They had not even kept enough for the driver to wait. I came out from under the overhang of the garage and walked down the gravel drive toward them. Slow, in no hurry, letting the rain soak my shoulders. I did not call out. I let them stand there gripping the cold, wet bars of the gate and feel every second of it. They looked nothing like the couple from the gala. Nothing like the couple from the party 3 weeks before that. Brennan wore a gray hooded sweatshirt soaked black across the shoulders, unshaven, dark hollows under his eyes, trembling in the cold. Veronica wore a cheap plastic rain slicker, her hair plastered flat to her skull, the flawless makeup gone, and underneath it the pale, frightened, ordinary face of a woman who had finally run out of places to hide. I reached the gate and stopped on my side of the iron bars. I did not unlock it. I did not invite them in out of the storm. I simply looked at them. Brennan gripped the bars so hard his knuckles went white. The arrogance was gone, every trace of it. He looked at me with wild, wet, desperate eyes, and the first sound out of him was not a word at all. It was a sob. He pressed his face against the cold iron and begged me to open the gate. 10 minutes, he said. Just 10 minutes. They had nowhere else to go. The prosecutors were talking about years. Their friends had vanished. The same people they had locked me in a shed to impress. All of them gone. Phones blocked. Doors shut. Veronica pushed up beside him, crowding the bars. The woman who had told me my place was among the grease and the rust now reached her hands through the gap in the iron, grasping at the air toward me, weeping. She begged me to forgive her. She said she had been foolish, that she had always respected my honest life, that she had never meant any of it. The lie was so transparent it was almost a kindness. How badly she told it. She had never respected my life. She respected. Now, only the money she had learned during the investigation that I quietly held. That was the whole of it. The shed had not changed. only the size of what they wanted from me had. Brennan dropped the pretense first. He always did break faster than he thought he would. He stopped talking about 10 minutes and family and forgiveness, and he went straight at the thing they had truly come for. He said he knew about the trust. He knew about the money. He said $3 million was nothing to me, a fraction. That I could make all of it disappear with a single signature. Pay the clients, hire the lawyers, make the charges go away. He swore he would spend the rest of his life making it up to me. He was trying to sell me, in the freezing rain, the exact same loyalty he had forged my name to steal. I stood there on my side of the iron, the rain running off the brim of my cap, and I looked at the two of them on their knees in the mud of my driveway. And I did not reach for the lock. I let them beg until they ran out of breath. I have learned that there is no point in interrupting a desperate man. He needs to empty himself first, to spend every promise and every apology and every lie he has saved up, before he is quiet enough to hear anything true. So I stood on my side of the iron and let the rain come down. And I waited, while Brennan sobbed and Veronica clawed at the air, and the whole performance played itself out against the sound of the storm. When at last they fell quiet, when there was nothing left in them but ragged breathing in the rain, I spoke. I told them their performance was very good. I told them they had a remarkable talent, the two of them, for playing the helpless victim immediately after burning down their own lives. I said it without heat. The time for heat had passed weeks ago, somewhere in the dark of a locked shed. I looked at my son first. I told him I had listened to every word of his apology, and that he was speaking to me as though he had simply made a bad investment, a young man's mistake. I told him to stop. He had not made a mistake. A mistake is a thing a man stumbles into. What Brennan had done was sit at a desk, night after night, with my canceled checks spread out under a lamp, and teach his own hand to become my hand. He had practiced my name the way a boy practices a thing he means to master. He had walked into an office and sworn, under that stolen name, that he had the right to give away the one piece of ground that held every honest day of my life. He had chosen, deliberately, to make his own father homeless to keep his wife out of a cell. I told him a man who can do that has not made a mistake. He has shown you exactly who he is. Then I looked at Veronica. I reminded her of a night 3 weeks gone. I reminded her of her cool fingers on my elbow, and the gravel under my boots, and the bolt sliding home. I reminded her of the words she had said to me through that door, calm and almost gentle. Your place is here, among the grease and the rust and the things nobody wanted anymore. I told her she had been right about one thing. There was a place for each of us, and a man's actions decide which side of the gate he stands on. She had built her whole life on looking down at people who worked with their hands, on the certainty that a man who smelled of a garage was a man of no account. And now here she knelt, in the mud, in the rain, begging that exact man for the only thing that could save her, her place. I told her, was out there now, on the far side of the iron, in the cold, with the rain and the wreckage and the things nobody wanted. And mine was in here, where it had always been, in the life I built, with my own 2 hands, while she was busy being ashamed of it. Brennan seized the bars and shook them, weakly, and begged me again about the trust, the money. $3 million. He said it was my duty as a father, so I told him the truth about the trust, the thing he had never known. I told him I had built it 12 years ago, the same year he first came to me with his hand out, expecting a dead man's gift. I told him I had hidden every dollar of it on purpose, because even then I had seen the rot beginning in him, the hunger for a thing he had not earned. I had hidden it so that he would be forced to build a real life with his own hands and learn what I had learned, that the only thing truly yours is the thing you make. I told him I would rather watch every cent of it burn than hand a single dollar to a man who forged my name to steal my home. I stepped back from the gate. I told them both that whatever we had once been to one another was over now, permanently. I said that family is not a last name or an accident of blood. Family is built, the way everything worth keeping is built, out of respect and honesty and trust. And they had taken all three and ground them into the mud. Brennan was no longer my son. He was a man who had tried to rob an old mechanic and been caught. Veronica was no longer anything to me at all. I raised one hand and pointed down the long, empty, rain-soaked road behind them. I told them to get up and turn around and walk and never come back to this gate as long as they lived. I told them that if they ever wrote to me, called me, or came to this property again, I would have them arrested for trespassing, and I meant it. And they could see in my face that I meant it. Then I turned my back on them. I walked up the gravel drive toward the warm light of my garage, slow and steady, the rain running off my shoulders. Behind me, I heard them brake, both of them, screaming my name into the storm, begging me to come back, begging for a mercy they had never once shown another living soul. I did not slow down. I did not look over my shoulder. I went inside, and I shut the heavy door, and I drew the bolt across it myself. The storm broke just before dawn. When the sun came up, it poured clean and gold across the wet trees, and the air smelled of rain and pine and turned earth, the way the world always smells after something has finally been washed out of it. I did not sleep much, but I did not feel tired. I spent the early hours in the garage, sweeping, putting the tools back in their places, the small, honest work that has held me together for 40 years. And then, a little after 8, I heard tires on the gravel again. I will admit my chest tightened. I thought, for one cold moment, that they had come back. I walked out into the bright, wet morning and looked down the drive. A yellow taxi sat on the far side of the gate, but only one door opened, and the figure that stepped out was not Brennan. And it was not Veronica. It was Cadence. He was not dressed the way his parents had always dressed him. No fitted jacket. No costume for a part he did not want. He wore a plain canvas coat and work boots and jeans, and he pulled 2 heavy duffel bags from the trunk, everything he owned, by the look of it. He paid the driver through the window, and the taxi turned and drove away. And he stood there alone in front of my locked gate in the clean morning light. He did not shout my name. He did not rattle the bars the way his father had. He set his bags down in the wet gravel, and he waited. He knew I was there. He respected the gate, and he had the dignity to wait for me to come to it. I walked down the long drive toward him, slow, my boots crunching on the gravel. He spoke first. When I reached the bars, and his voice was steady, though his eyes were not, he told me he had packed his things and walked out of his parents' house 3 days ago, before the foreclosure, before the worst of it. He told me he had not known, not about the loan, not about the forged deed, not about the client's stolen money, none of it, until the agents came to the door He told me he had stood in that gala and watched his father toast a fortune that did not exist, and he had felt sick to his bones, because somewhere underneath the lie, he had always known it was a lie. He told me his father had asked him, after it all came down, to help hide what little was left from the investigators, to lie, to become a part of it, and he had refused. He said he would rather sleep on the street than spend one more day inside that house, breathing that air. Then he told me the thing I had built a whole life waiting, without knowing it, to hear. He said he had a degree and a head full of theory, and that he had realized he did not actually know how to build anything. Not really, not with his hands. He pointed past me, at the garage, at the bays, and the tools, and the lights burning even in the morning sun. He said he wanted to learn. He asked if I needed an apprentice. He asked if he could stay in the room over the garage and earn his keep. He did not ask about the trust. He did not ask for money, or comfort, or rescue. He asked for work. I stood there a long moment, looking at my grandson through the iron bars. 3 weeks before, his father had knelt in that same mud and begged me for millions to escape the consequences of his own greed. This boy stood in the same spot and asked only for a chance to work hard and live honestly. The same blood ran in both of them. But blood, I had learned, decides nothing. A man is the sum of what he chooses. And standing at my gate were the two roads a life can take, and only one of them had chosen the truth. I reached into my pocket and took out the heavy brass key. I did not say anything. I slid it into the lock, and I turned it, and I pushed the gate open wide. The same gate I had refused to open the night before. I stepped aside, and I let him through. I took him into the garage, and there, on the bench, sat the wooden box, and inside it, the clock I had built with my own hands. The brass gears cut one tooth at a time. The clock that had kept perfect time through a whole long night, locked in a freezing shed. I had built it for a marriage that turned out to be a lie. So I gave it to the only honest thing that marriage had ever produced. I put it in his hands and told him it kept good time, and that it always would. Because it was built too. We did not talk much after that. I handed him a sanding block and pointed him at a stack of rough oak in the corner, and the two of us went to work, side by side, in the quiet, the morning sun coming through the open doors. So let me leave you with what the storm left standing. True wealth is not the suit you wear or the size of the room you can rent. It is the integrity of what you do with your two hands when no one is watching. Blood does not make a family. It only offers you the chance to build one. And when a man squanders that chance with greed and lies, those ties must sometimes be cut to protect what is real. A life built on stolen ground always comes down. But a life built on honest work, on respect freely given and earned, will stand against any storm that comes. If you believe that respect is something earned through honesty and never simply owed by blood, leave a comment below and tell me your own story. Subscribe and stay with me for more stories of quiet justice.